Jill, you're now live.
Thank you. Hello everybody and welcome to this afternoon's session titled Similarities and Differences, Project Comparison of Two Leading SEN Facilities. I'm Jill Holden and will be chairing today's webinar. We focus on a comparison of key similarities and shared patterns, coupled with unique differences across two schools, both designed by Pozzoni Architecture and built by Galliford Try. Firstly, we have Vanguard School and secondly, Cleve Meadow School, both located in London boroughs. Both schools completed last year and post-occupancy feedback with the end users has taken place, albeit everyone was very mindful of the impact that COVID has had on the operations over the last 12 months. Nevertheless, these findings will be touched on today. So let me introduce you to our two excellent speakers. We have Claire Jackson, Education Director at Galliford Try, and Catherine Mully, Director of the Education Team at Pozzoni Architecture. Claire leads the education sector at Galliford Try and delivers new and refurbished schools for the business. She is responsible for the sector team on a national basis and very much drives the principles of innovation and collaboration to ensure the delivery of high quality education buildings.
Sorry, Jill, can you mute your computer in the background, please?
Claire leads the education sector at Galliford Try. I'll just repeat that then, sorry. So let me introduce you to our two speakers today. We've got Claire Jackson, Education Director at Galliford Try, and Catherine Mully, Director of the Education Team at Pozzoni Architecture. Claire leads the education sector at Galliford Try and delivers new and refurbished schools for the business. She is responsible for the sector team on a national basis and very much drives the principles of innovation and collaboration to ensure the delivery of high quality education buildings. Her team manages a busy portfolio due to Galliford's being one of the key contractors delivering for the Department for Education. Catherine leads the Pozzoni Education Team again on a national basis via its London and Manchester offices. Although education has been one of the company's core sectors for more than 30 years, it's the last decade which has seen the team build a strong reputation for SEN provision. Catherine acts as a design advisor for a number of clients, written design guides specifically around children with ASD, as well as leading her concept and delivery team on learning facilities right across the country. Both organisations have worked in partnership on many occasions. However, today we'll obviously be focusing our attention specifically on Vanguard and Cleve Meadow schools. Just a final point, please do jump in on the chat and ask questions throughout the course of the presentation, as we'll leave 10 or 15 minutes at the end to run through as many questions as we can. So delighted to hand over to Catherine to start the presentation.
Thanks very much, Jill. So, in terms of our agenda, we'll start with a brief introduction to each of the two projects, which includes some key facts about each school and its site setting. And then we'll move on to a description of some of the ways our designs for each school have met the specific requirements of the end users, including how we've created calm and flexible learning environments, which are robust and safe and provide a sense of routine and predictability. As we go through each section, we'll look at some of the feedback that we've received from both schools. This feedback was very high level and obtained in February of this year, and then we'll move into our summary section. So we start with Vanguard School, which is a 78-place new build school for pupils aged between 11 and 19. All students must be diagnosed with ASD in order to be able to attend, but very often they'll have additional needs such as OCD, SEMH and ADHD. The school operator is the National Autistic Society Academies Trust, which was formed in 2012 by the National Autistic Society. The trust currently operates 3 free schools and Vanguard is the most recent addition. The NAS also operate a further 6 independent day schools across the country. So in terms of the site location, it's located on a busy corner in the South London borough of Lambeth. You can see the site location plan there in the bottom right. and it's only a short walk from some of London's key landmark buildings and tourist attractions. The funded GIFA was 2,475 metres squared, and the construction cost was £8.6 million. It took 57 weeks to build and was completed in January 2020. The total site area is only 4,000 square metres, so it's a very tight site. And you'll see from the site plan, it's a very long, thin piece of land with only one of the site edges suitable for vehicular access. So just a point to note in terms of the size of the site, building bulletin guidelines for a school of this capacity suggests a minimum site area of around 12,000 square metres. So it was immediately obvious to us from the outset there were some challenges to face in terms of overcoming these site constraints. So because of the limited site size, we're really restricted in terms of the possible site solutions for the positioning and the shape of the school. And so we focused on 3 options to look at in detail. You'll see from the little thumbnail sketch in the bottom middle there, the 3 key options that we focused on, which included a U shape, an H shape, and a sort of back to front L. The final plan form that we chose to develop was the back to front L. And we chose this option because this allowed us to be able to create a focal point, an entrance in the southern eastern corner of the site. It also opened up to the western corner, to the open playing fields beyond to the western edge. So that was a real attractive benefit for this option. And practically, the back to front L shape was just more efficient and cost effective to build. We only considered a 2-storey development because the Trust felt that anything more than 2 storeys simply wasn't practical in terms of meeting the user group's needs adequately. So in terms of accommodation, in addition to the 14 classrooms and specialist teaching areas, we have a group of soft play and sensory and therapy rooms, a library and ICT suite, a sports hall which is used for the pupils and also for the local community, dining and kitchen facilities, and breakout areas, which is also available for community use. So moving on to Cleve Meadow School. This is a 120-place new build school for pupils aged between 11 and 19. The school's been designed to cater for pupils who have ASD, coupled with other learning difficulties such as SEMH and MLD. The operator is the Kemnal Multi Academies Trust, which is one of the largest MATs in the southeast of England, and it has 45 primary and secondary schools within its family. This site's located in the boundary of the existing Cleve Park Mainstream School in Sidcup in Bexley, and Cleve Park School is also run by KMAT. The funded GIFA in this instance was just shy of 3,500 metres squared, and again it was provided over 2 storeys. The construction cost is 13 million, and it took 52 weeks to build and was completed in May 2020. And the site area in this case is over 84,000 square metres, so exactly the opposite scenario for Vanguard. We had plenty of area to work with in this case. So as you can see from the floor plans to the right hand side here, this building is essentially a square with the middle removed in order to create a central courtyard space. As with Vanguard, we only considered a 2-storey development because the Trust again felt that anything more than 2 storeys just simply wasn't practical in terms of being able to meet the user requirements in terms of safeguarding and flexibility. Accommodation, in addition to the classroom, the general teaching classrooms and post-16 general teaching, again we had a suite of soft therapy and sensory rooms, library, ICT and learning resource areas. This school also has a performing arts centre, which is also to be used by the mainstream Cleve Park School, as well as community use, staff facilities and an all-weather pitch, again available for community use. So I'm going to hand over to Claire now, who's going to talk a little bit more about each of the school site settings in detail.
Thank you. So as Jill introduced the session, what we were looking at with these 2 schools is that we wanted to consider the factors that have influenced the similarities and the differences, because And the first topic that I want to consider is that although we had similar briefs, we had very different locations to deal with. So first of all, Cleve Meadow School is a suburban location and co-located with a mainstream secondary school. So it's built in the grounds of Cleve Park Secondary School in Bexley, and its co-location maximises inclusivity with the mainstream school. So children from Cleve Meadow can access the mainstream school and use the facilities there. And the feedback we've had is that the Cleve Meadow students absolutely love going into Cleve Park School for using the science and technology classrooms there for their lessons. And it also means that the SEN pupils have the opportunity to acclimatise to a slightly busier, kind of noisier environment, but in a very controlled and limited way as appropriate for them. As Catherine mentioned, Cleve Meadow also incorporates the performing arts facilities. So we've got drama and music facilities there for all to share. So for Cleve Meadow, for the mainstream school and for the local community. So the approach to inclusivity at Cleve Meadow has very much been about creating a space that everybody feels part of. So it's not seen as a separate entity. And in that way, mainstream students will also gain a better awareness and understanding of special needs, and reciprocal support can be developed. Next slide, please. So as we've said, Cleve Meadow is in a suburban residential location within the London Borough of Bexley. It's metropolitan greenbelt and very large grounds though that you can see within the diagram. The location of the new building is just off of the highway, which is Bexley Lane, so it's very easily accessible. There were three existing vehicular access points from Bexley Lane onto the Cleve Park school site and one existing pedestrian access point. And this vehicular access is particularly important for SEN schools where students tend to arrive either by minibus or private hire or dropped off by parents. So that the arrival for vehicles and for students to the SEN school is much more important to consider and to accommodate effectively within the design, the drop-off and parking facilities. So for this scheme, that wasn't a constraint or a challenge, and the preferred location of the building meant that we didn't have to create a new vehicle entrance point. Next slide, please. So this is an image of the Bexley Lane facade. So we're showing there that the entrance that we created. So it's a very welcome entrance with a shallow overhang to create some cover without being too dark. And the feedback we've had from the school is that it works really well with the arrivals with the minibuses. It's very welcoming, but now they want to make it a bit more attractive with some planters and some planting. Next slide, please. So in stark contrast then, Vanguard School, an urban location and a standalone facility. As Catherine was saying, it's a very tight site, just under 1 acre, next to the main road, the Kennington Road, which is the A23 in Lambeth. So it's a quite central London location, but a residential urban area. And the lack of external space here did really influence the development. The access onto the site, the only vehicular access onto the site was possible from Lollard Street, which is at the south end of the site. You can see there in the image where there was an existing community facility which we needed to re-provide as part of the scheme. Next slide, please. And for Vanguard School, the National Autistic Society wanted to deal with inclusivity in a slightly different way, that they wanted to make the school feel like a small secondary school and create a very aspirational environment. The school caters for young autistic people who are highly functioning, but wouldn't necessarily be able to access a curriculum within a mainstream school due to their high levels of anxiety and their complex needs. They're very much cognitively in line with their peers, though, and that curriculum needed to be able to be delivered within the Vanguard School facilities. So part of the brief was also to provide the community facility, and that involved a community room with a kitchen and the requirement to locate that next to the sports hall with a separate entrance so that that could all be zoned for out of hours access. Next slide, please. So as we've said, a very tight site, but what we managed to do is create a statement entrance at the southeast corner of the site that's shown there in the top photograph. So we've got a small drop-off area for taxis and minibuses. And what the school how the school operate this is that they use staggered times for arrivals, including using a breakfast club. But they also encourage the use of independent travel through public transport, tubes and buses. So I think the diagram there at the bottom is showing you the site as Catherine was describing earlier. So I think, as soon as we started working with this project and this site and with the school, we all knew that drop-off was going to be a compromise for the scheme and for the school. But the feedback so far is that that's working well. Due to the location of the school team have always planned to be able to offer opportunities for post-16 students to go out and make trips into the local area. As we were saying, the central location, it's easily accessible to the South Bank museums and art galleries. And they wanted to be able to offer this as an enrichment to the curriculum, and in that way actually make the most of the location. Obviously the COVID situation has had an impact on that, a massive impact on that on the last year, but they still have that plan to make the best use of their urban location. So I'm now going to hand back to Catherine.
Thanks, Claire. So the overarching high-level brief for both of the schools was to create empowering learning environments for the pupils which would help them to flourish and excel in society. In order to be able to design environments that are appropriate and suitable for children with autism, we need to understand how they see the world and the environment around them. So they'll very often experience hypersensitivity to sounds, touches, tastes, smells. So for example, they might find certain background sounds which other people can ignore or block out unbearably loud or distracting. They may also be fascinated by lights or spinning objects. An overloading of the senses can then lead to a meltdown or a shutdown if that sensory overload is sufficiently high. And they may also experience really high levels of anxiety, which result from the overbearing and inconsistent sensory differences, which can manifest itself in behaviour which can be challenging and sometimes dangerous. Based on our experience in SEN design, Potsonies of practice always adopt 3 core principles when designing schools for children with autism. Our designs must reduce anxiety and encourage calm. They must respond to heightened senses and provide a safe and functional teaching environment. So the next few slides will look briefly at how some of these core principles have been interpreted into the design for both of the schools. So if we start with calm and flexible spaces and look at the external areas, outdoor learning spaces can play a huge part in encouraging children with ASD to engage and learn, and generally to be happier and healthier as individuals. They can also be a form of retreat from the confines of a formal classroom or a learning area, which sometimes can feel pressurised and too formal. During the early engagement meetings for the Cleve Meadow School, the Trust were really clear about their requirement for a particular external space, which could be used as a retreat and calming area for the pupils. So this is something separate from the general outdoor play area. As we worked through the spatial adjacencies for the school as a whole, we looked at where the retreat space could sit in context with the other key spaces within the school. The diagram on the bottom left of this slide is a very early adjacency diagram, which is starting to explore the square plan form for the building, with the external retreat space in the middle. And then as the design has progressed and we understand the adjacencies of all the other key spaces within the school building, the diagram is developed and the central courtyard area really takes shape as the heart of the school, I guess. The precedent images to the right of this slide show some examples of courtyard spaces that the Trust wanted to almost replicate in their new school. So the top image there shows how the central courtyard area is visible from the circulation routes, and the Trust really wanted to replicate that in their new building. The bottom image shows the transition between internal and external spaces, and again the Trust were really keen on trying to replicate that if they could. And then the middle image shows the possibility of creating a congregation space and introducing some greenery into the courtyard space. And so all of those three key design principles were to be carried forward. The final design incorporates the central courtyard, which is about 400 square metres in size. So that's quite a big area, but we were lucky because we had such a generous overall site area allowance to work with, and we didn't really have site constraints such as services, trees or roads and boundaries. So that benefit really helped us achieve this plan form. Being able to have the central courtyard and the building working around that meant that the courtyard space is visible from all focal points around the school. So there's a visual compass for the pupils as they move around the building. Direct access is achieved from most of the key spaces, so from the dining hall, the library, and also from key points across the corridor areas. And we've created bifolding doors at the back of the library area here, so this enables us to open up into the courtyard space and just allow more flexibility for larger group requirements. As you can see from the as-built photograph in the bottom right, the furniture that's been installed in the courtyard area includes bench-style seating surrounded by planter beds, which the pupils assist with looking after, planting up and maintaining. So in terms of end user feedback, as we've already discussed, Vanguard had a very limited external area to play with, and it's also really heavily overlooked by the public. But despite these constraints, the feedback from the head is that the external spaces work really well. Our landscape strategy was to create a mix of spaces which include soft informal play, perhaps a more traditional hard play area, and also a sensory garden, which the children really enjoy in particular. I think you can see from the as-built photograph here, they have screened off up to a certain level in order to minimise the amount of overlooking. Perhaps a more predictable feedback is from Cleve Meadow. The head said straight away that the courtyard space is absolutely their favourite space in the whole school. It's at the heart of everything they do and is seen from most of the spaces around the school. It's also been a really important space during COVID in terms of being able to manage the bubbles. So perhaps one takeaway from this is regardless of how small your external areas are that we have to work with, if they're designed correctly, they can be a really effective and important area for the pupils. So sticking on the theme of calm and flexible spaces, we'll move into the building now and look at teaching spaces. There's a number of key design considerations to take into account in relation to SEN classroom design. And they include the need to be flexible and adaptable in order to respond to the needs and the behaviours of the pupils, which can change very quickly without warning. They should be very well organised, so any storage to be locked away and out of view, whether that's through a dedicated storage room, a purpose-built storage room, or roller shutters. Acoustic performance. Classrooms in SEN schools need to have a very good sound absorption and reverberation level. A noise-sensitive environment helps create a sense of calm within the specialist learning areas. So acoustic Class A ceilings are essential, and the walls need to have the appropriate acoustic requirements, as well as be robust and hard-wearing. Classrooms need to be non-threatening and distracting, so no clutter. They need to be ordered layouts. And that goes as far as saying no patterns in the walls and floor finishes. The right amount of natural light is also key, because too much visual stimulation can be a distraction. And this is a good reason to have loose furniture, which can be easily moved around to avoid possible distraction from windows or activities going on outside. Dedicated external areas. Ideally, provision should be made for access to secure outdoor play areas. Again, ideally accessed directly from the classroom, and if possible, these should be covered to allow for all year round use. Breakout spaces are really important in order to provide calming areas for children who may get overwhelmed within the main classroom environment. And we're going to look at breakout spaces in a little bit more detail on some of the next slides, but they can be as simple as an open plan area within a classroom or a dedicated breakout room. So being able to maximise flexibility and adaptability within the classroom area was a really key issue for both of the trusts, and we explored a number of different proposals showing how a classroom could be laid out in order to achieve the right level of flexibility and adaptability. The sketch at the top right hand side of this slide shows how one of the classroom cluster studies we looked at for Vanguard was then taken forward and developed into the final plan layout. So you're seeing the main ground floor plan here in the middle. So you can see the inclusion of a small room, ideally between 5 and 8 square metres, which is directly accessible off each classroom and located along the external wall in order to provide natural daylight and ventilation. So these are referred to as either an ILR, which is an individual learning room, or a calm room. So in the case of Vanguard, the rooms will be used more as a one-to-one personalised teaching area for pupils who need more focused learning assistance. And the photo to the bottom right here shows it's set up for a one-to-one learning scenario. We adopted a similar cluster approach in terms of the classrooms and the calm rooms for Cleve Meadow, but as you can see from this photograph, the room's set up for as more of a relaxing, calming space with bean bags and a rug. As I've said before, being able to locate these rooms on the external face means we can incorporate a window, and this maximises opportunities to change the room function to a more personalised one-to-one learning scenario in the future. So feedback from both of the schools were focused about being able to provide as much flexibility as possible within the teaching areas. So as we said, both schools, these are designed as separate rooms off the classrooms, as we've talked about. And this follows the line of thinking in the DFE's Gen 7 baseline design approach. But in the scenario where we do have these as separate rooms, then we need to minimise potential security risks. And therefore we need to ensure that vision panels within the doors, as well as perhaps glazed screens within the wall between the two rooms, are included. An alternative design solution may be to create open alcoves or zones within the main teaching spaces, which can act as quiet areas or individual learning areas. One of the SEN schools that Claire and I are both working on at the moment is looking to have a more zonal approach. So you can see that this is an extract from a typical general teaching classroom here in the school that we're currently looking at. And you can see that the quiet area is just a zone located off the open classroom area. So it's a 5 square metre area. And they've achieved the quiet area through the use of FF&E solutions and perhaps partition areas, so creating pods. The colour palette for internal finishes and finishings can play an important role in creating a calming environment within classrooms and school areas and environments generally. Numerous tests have shown that pale pink seems to be a favourite colour overall, with the more cooler colours such as green and blue scoring consistently well. So something along the colour palette wheel that we tend to use in all of our schools along the right hand side here. I've already mentioned avoiding patterns on walls and floors, and that includes textured and checkerboard floor finishes. We always try and stick with plain single colour soft furnishings, and try and avoid non-reflective surfaces. Photos, some of the key spaces here identify where we've tried to achieve a very calming, natural colour palette, and this is the dining area in Vanguard and then the entrance area here in Cleve Meadow. I'm going to hand over to Claire now, who's going to talk about robust and safe.
Thank you. So I'm going to move into an area now where we're going to talk more about the similarities rather than the differences between the two schemes. And just to introduce this topic, the National Autistic Society have something, a methodology which they call the SPELL framework. And this is the framework that they use for understanding and responding to the needs of children and adults on the autistic spectrum. And within that acronym, the E is for empathy. So what we've sought to do with these schemes is recognise and understand the perspective of the person with autism by designing and building a safe and robust environment. And that's really with the acknowledgement that it's really difficult to function unless you feel safe, and therefore difficult to learn and flourish within those environments. Next slide, please. Cleve Meadows School then, the site and the building are very robust and safe, built with appropriate materials, a very high impact resistant external wall finishes. And we used a limited palette of materials there, brick and render, which are robust, but also quite appropriate to create that kind of calm, uncluttered environment that Catherine's been describing. So at Cleve Meadow, what we also incorporated glazed bricks around the main entrance, which create a nice focal point for the entrance, but it's also a very tactile surface. In the courtyard for Cleve Meadow, we've got white render there, which we've used to maximise the daylight reflection. We've also got toughened glazing and anti-tamper restrictions on all the windows. The site has got a secure perimeter fencing, which is not scalable. Next slide, please. So similarly at Vanguard School, again, very high impact external wall finishes, a limited palette of materials again, but this time brick and rain screen cladding, which was partly driven by the local planning policies within Lambeth, but also offers surfaces which are very difficult to climb. And this was part of the feedback from the National Autistic Society from their previous experiences, that they didn't want any brise-soleil or any ledges or any features which would have aided the ability to actually climb the building. We also had to consider how we were going to bring natural daylight into the building. Obviously really important to be as much daylight as possible, and we needed to use skylights to do that, but it was very important that the direct sunlight was shaded but didn't create shadows that then could be perceived as black holes and cause anxiety to the students. Next slide, please. So moving inside, internally, a similar approach in both schools. So we've got an image of Cleve Meadow at the top there and Vanguard at the bottom. So both using very robust materials. The wall partitions, it was very important that they couldn't be damaged by contact. So we used an enhanced plasterboard with an engineered core, which has got a much higher strength and durability. And that's a Habita board from British Gypsum. For the ceiling tiles, we've used metal concealed grid ceilings, which needed a tool to be removed. It was really important that these were much more tamper-proof than the normal kind of laid-in grid ceilings, and that's a product from Knauf Armstrong. We've used a centralised, fully mechanical ventilation system, and this was partly due to efficiency, but also consideration of the actual acoustic, the sound that was being generated by the system. It's really important that any sound from the ventilation system didn't add to issues of sensory overload, as Catherine was describing, that can be an issue for autistic young people. The heating source was from radiant panels, which have created this clear, uncluttered finish that you can see there in the teaching spaces. Another piece of feedback that we've got about the services was that at Vanguard we decided to install a key operated fire alarm system, and the school have fed back that they think that that's been a very good investment from their first year in the building. I'm going to hand back to Catherine now.
Excuse me, thanks Claire. So looking at the subject of routine and predictable, children diagnosed with ASD will very often show restricted and repetitive patterns of behaviour and an insistence on sameness with an inflexible adherence to routines. So providing a school building that's been specifically designed to be easy to navigate around is really important in order to help reduce anxiety levels. So if you look at what we did at Vanguard as an example, the plans here on the right hand side show the general arrangement solutions for ground and first floor, and then the bottom left hand diagram has shown how we've tried to zone the areas together. So classroom clusters are the same on both floors. We talked about the classroom clusters earlier with the dedicated individual learning rooms and built-in storage areas. So they're the same on both levels. The toilets are stacked vertically, so on a practical level that obviously helps with drainage, but again the pupils understand where the toilets are on both levels. There's no confusion there. The corridors are much wider than in mainstream schools, so as to minimise anxiety, but the corridor lengths are also quite short, and this helps prevent running opportunities. And this is one of the things that the head at Vanguard gave us some really positive feedback on. There are no running opportunities. Children do tend to get anxious moving between classrooms, so they were very insistent on having 2.5 metre wide corridors rather than perhaps the more standard 2 metre wide corridors for SEN schools. And we used a zoning approach in the layouts, so all staff and therapy areas are grouped together. The specialist subject classrooms are all located along the eastern facade on both floors, and the sixth form area has its own dedicated external social space, and this just helps with being able to control the mixing of age groups. A controlled mixing of age groups can help anxiety levels, and so grouping primary and secondary in separate parts of the building is also good practice. We've talked about the circulation routes being as wide as possible. Cleve Meadow was 2 metres wide, Vanguard was 2.5 metres wide, and we've talked about the need to avoid the long runs of corridor in order to prevent running opportunities. And breaking up the transition spaces with breakout areas can just help reduce anxiety and overload. So being able to intersperse the floor plans with areas of breakout spaces is really good practice. And in the case of Cleve Meadow, a visual reminder of where the pupils are as they move around the building is really good practice, and the courtyard has been a really good way of being able to achieve that. So in terms of end user feedback, both schools made a particular point about the dining hall and said that the dining halls were too small. This actually, in our experience, tends to be a common issue with new build schools across the board, whether that's mainstream or SEN facilities. But many children attending an SEN school will find the dining experience one of the most stressful times of the day. And a lot of the pupils, as well as having ASD, ADHD or other needs, may also have phobias or disorders associated with eating. And so this part of the daily routine can be incredibly stressful and can create high levels of anxiety. And so the dining spaces really do need to be big enough to be able to accommodate the needs of these pupils, but also they need to be flexible enough to be able to adapt very quickly to the changing needs of the children. The plan in the right here shows sort of the as-built dining hall layout at Cleve Meadow, and it shows the chair and table store as a built-in room off the main dining hall area. And the head at Cleve Meadow said she would much rather have had that space, the chair and table store, available as the open plan, part of the open plan dining area, because they very rarely take the furniture away from the dining hall and put it into the store. So they'd rather have had that area as dining space. They only had 79 square metres rather allocated to them for 120 pupils at Cleve Meadow, and the store is about 16 to 20 square metres. So it's quite a large area in proportion to the overall dining area. The photograph here at the bottom shows the dining hall at Vanguard, and this is only 70 square metres for 79 pupils, and it is a small area. Claire, would you like to do the summary?
Thank you. So what we were looking to do was just explore a little bit around these two schemes, how a similar brief and specification for SEN schools can create quite different end results due to the location, the site specifics and the school preferences. But also, I think we've shown there can be similarities and standard aspects to the layouts, the use of standard specifications for details or products, which went across both schemes. But the starting point of the brief, and in particular the school-specific brief, can take on greater significance and importance with an SEN school, as can the end user preferences. So that engagement with the end user is really crucial. And I think that's a point that came out of one of the earlier project showcases this morning. And also it's something that Catherine flagged up through the example of the calm rooms and how that's sort of being used differently across the two schemes that we've built out, and now considered differently in the scheme that we're in design with at the moment. So it'd be interesting if people have got sort of questions or any feedback of their experiences with calm rooms or independent learning spaces. So we think the site can have a huge impact on the arrival of students and how that's going to be managed, and then how the school will interact with the local community and the neighbours. And we've also shown the huge value that can be gained from a good use of the external space. And even when the school is as small a site as Vanguard School, that they're really making the most out of their external area and their sort of central London location when they're allowed to travel. Next slide, please. So just the final slide here is showing some of the feedback that we've had from the two head teachers, and that's really, it's really rewarding to get that kind of feedback. But I think that the points that I'd like to end on are really the positive impacts that these schools are having for the children, the staff and the families. So Vanguard School have got a video on their website which is called What It Means to Me, where some of the children are talking about how much they are enjoying the new school. And the feedback from the staff there is that student attendance in their sort of previous locations was at around 10 to 20%, but since moving into the new facilities at Vanguard has actually gone up to 90%, which is just amazing. And Cleve Meadow School, equally, the staff and student the feedback is that the students and staff love the school. It's a very pleasant environment to teach and learn in, and also that the impact on behaviour has been really positive since they've moved into their new facilities, which we think's great kind of testament to the kind of inclusive learning environments that we were all trying to provide with these schemes. I'll hand over to Jill now to see if we've got time for any questions.
Thanks very much, both. Brilliant. I think we can probably just squeeze a couple of questions in there now. But firstly, what a fascinating insight into the two schools, and particularly interesting to hear the post-occupancy feedback and how these facilities have actually made a real difference to students and teachers' lives. Presumably carrying out post-occupancy reviews are slightly more challenging during these COVID times, but still as important as ever. Probably one question quickly from me, first of all, has there been any feedback from the schools with regards the impacts of the pandemic on the facilities within the school, and also what they might need in the future?
I think we did touch on this when we spoke to the head teachers in February, and so two of the bits of feedback are particularly around the circulation space at Vanguard, that they felt that had been really positive, and it meant that because they had this the wide corridors there, that they're able to easily move around the building and have the kind of safe space that they needed between the students and staff. And then the other bit of feedback that we had from Cleve Meadow was that they've been using the courtyard for their bubbles to have lunch, so that they could kind of sit separately within the courtyard and feel very safe, I guess. And it's a lovely space, so they've been able to use that. So yeah, we did ask about is there anything, you know, with hindsight, because obviously none of us knew how 2020 was going to go, that they would have done differently, and they said they felt quite comfortable within the new facilities that they could operate.
Excellent, thanks very much, Claire. We've got a quick question in terms of cost from Richard from Barker Associates, who initially states a fab projects, so that's thumbs up. Are the costs full delivery costs, including fees and disbursements, etc., or net construction costs?
Do you want me to do that one, or?
Yeah, no, yeah, go for it, Claire.
So that I think the values that we included were it was our Galliford contract values, but that does include, we picked up the projects at feasibility stage, so it does all include all design fees from feasibility stage onwards, and any surveys that we would have need to have done, including, and we were responsible for getting planning permission, but it's not the project budget, it's not the full client budget costs.
Excellent, okay, thank you. Quick question relating to design, so one for you, Catherine. Jane Simpson has asked, and I think this was in relation to Vanguard. Yeah. Was there any additional arrangements required given the upper story, which is often less suitable for ASD students?
What we tried to do was make sure that all of the specialist teaching classrooms, so such as art, CT, science, were all located on the ground floor, so that all pupils could easily access those specialist classrooms. And then the general teaching classrooms were sort of spread between ground and first floor. There's obviously a lift. The therapy and breakout spaces, we tried to make sure that there was an equal spread between ground and first floor again. And a lot more of the admin staff support areas were located on the first floor, just as a means of being able to add additional passive supervision, if you like, on the first floor level. And similarly for Cleve Meadow, actually, I mean, that's a two-storey facility, and it was the same principle. So the therapy and sensory rooms we've split between ground and first floor. 2 hygiene rooms in each. So again, one on ground floor and first floor. So it works quite well. I mean, ideally, in an ideal world, you'd have a single-story solution, but it simply wasn't practical in either case. And none of the feedback that we've had related to any issues between about them being on 2 stories or higher. We're actually working on an SEN school, coincidentally with Galliford's, which is a 4-story solution in London, and there aren't any issues associated with that as long as we plan accordingly. It can work really well.
Lovely, thank you very much. Just a comment from Nada, who is asked, well, a bit of a request to share some insights on library and IT space design in SEN schools. So we'll follow up that after this session as well. Mindful of time, so I think we've come to the end of the session. So all that's left to do is say thanks to our guest speakers, Claire and Catherine, for a really insightful presentation. Thanks also to the audience out there for the chat and the comments and the questions along the way, and also the team behind the scenes of this year's Inclusive Learning Environments show. We're halfway through Digital Week, and there's still quite a few seminars and webinars to register for, so please do take a look online and sign up for any sessions of interest. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.